Hey Shooby-Doodlers, how are you doing? About 3 weeks ago I had a comment on a video from Jenneke Hersbach, and it kind of threw me, and I've been thinking about it ever since, and I thought the best thing to do was just sit down and talk about it. What was the comment? Hi Shoo, I have just one question, and that is, how do you choose what you draw with your written text? I mean, you must have a complete story in your mind. I love watching your videos and learn a lot from you. Well, thanks, Jenneke. There are two things going on here. Sometimes I'm an illustrator, not very often these days, where I illustrate other people's work. And other times I am the author and illustrator. So let me talk about being an illustrator first. I think most illustrators start off, sort of being creative kind of people, and they'll have this kind of storytelling bent about them. I often feel I'm repeating myself on this channel, but repetition is kind of the secret of actually getting a message across, really. That illustration is about storytelling. Illustration is the branch of art where you are telling stories. That is what it's about. You are illustrating a story. You're illustrating an idea, whatever, but it's storytelling. So what happens, somebody's quite good at drawing and stuff, and I think it tends to be drawing, and eventually maybe they get to art school, maybe they never got to art school, but they just can't stop drawing. And something kind of changes. When you get to art school, you kind of get sent off into all these different directions. Some people go into pottery and ceramics and fine art and industrial design, all sorts of things. One little group will still be really quite into drawing, and that's kind of their main thing. And they just kind of keep going that way, and some will then peel off into fine art and things like that, but some will sort of keep still going towards illustration, and those people will tend to be in some way storytellers. So they kind of have it in them, and that's why I was kind of flummoxed by this question right from the start. How do you know what to illustrate? You just do. This also comes down to questions like what is art? What is an artist? And I do say this is the whole essence of this channel. When I started it, is that everyone can draw. I do say, and I really believe it, that everyone can draw. It's what I believe. Look, I wrote the book. Everyone can draw. And I believe that everyone can draw. If you can sign your name, you are drawing. Just making marks is drawing. Getting good at drawing is another thing altogether. That requires practice, 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 as I always say. And getting really good at drawing requires a lot of dedication. To get really good at drawing, you don't have to just, add that extra little bit in. I think you have to make a few sacrifices along the way. I could certainly think back in my career where I could have just said, oh, forget this, and got a proper job. I would probably have retired with a nice pension by now. And I constantly have this thing going on in my head thinking, oh, I could have done that, and I could have sort of towed the line and whatever. But the things that I have gained, are much, much better than that. Although one day I might sort of think, oh, I wish I really had a nice corporate pension, but then I wouldn't have had the life and the experiences that I have had. So, to get really good at drawing, it does require a little bit of sacrifice and certainly a lot of hard work. And most people are not going to do that because they have other interests which are just that bit more, and they're going to sacrifice things to pursue those interests. So you end up with this little group of people who are, who have worked hard, and they've learned, and they've kind of just practiced and practiced, and so they have self-selected themselves because they are intrinsically storytellers, and so you will get this group of people who illustrate for authors, and they never think of writing. They might do, and they might think, if I wrote, I would get all the royalties, but then they carry on, and so they actually put all their energy into improving themselves, improving their art, improving their skill, improving their art of being an illustrator. And the more you do something, the better you get at it. Skill skill. It's not about talent. Yeah, talent sort of comes in there, and you might sort of, your parents might have been artistic, and you've picked up that from them, and you've seen artistic people, you've been brought up, and things like that. And things bring you to a point, but in the end, that skill is only achieved through practice. And I can think of my first sort of attempts at illustrating a book. Well, I was probably about 5, I think, and it wasn't terribly good. But my first sort of proper attempts then would have been at art college, and they're not very good, and the ideas weren't very good. And in fact, in those days, we were blocked in by type. And we didn't have computers. You couldn't set type all over the place and do the amazing things you can do now. You were just given a kind of a square or an oblong or a landscape to fill that space. It just so happened that when I started illustrating, it coincided with what was called the desktop publishing revolution. Type could suddenly go wobbly. And in fact, the first book I ever did that was inspired like that, some poor artist had to cut each individual letter up and paste them down in those curves to make it look like it had been done on a computer, because they couldn't afford a computer. And in fact, that publisher years later eventually grudgingly got the Mac salesman in to sell them a computer when I'd actually had one for quite a long time, but they just wouldn't invest. So what happened to me? Why am I different? Before I ever really got serious about drawing, I was about 18. I don't know if I must have told this story before, but I was doing math, physics and biology. I say math because I know many of my viewers are not British. We say maths, in fact. And I was doing math, physics and biology. I was going to be a scientist, and my maths was desperate. What it is my arithmetic is really bad. I'm really bad at adding up. And so everything else kind of falls to pieces because of that. And I had a really great teacher who said, look, you spend all your time drawing, just don't do maths anymore, go to the art department. Tony Rotham, the art teacher, was there waiting for me, and he was brilliant, and he introduced me to the idea of looking at things, showed me how a pencil worked. Which seems obvious, but it wasn't. He explained a pencil to me in a completely different way. What this incredible tool was, showed me how to look at something, showed me how to draw, and bang, that was it. I was hooked. It wasn't just hooked. It was like a release. I was sort of whoa, this is what you're good at. There was a lot of struggle. There were a lot of tears, a lot of struggle. I would say, looking back now, at the time, it was probably just like, artistic kind of stuff. But now I look back, that is exactly what it was. To get to where I could just begin to get started. When I was 13, I sort of worked out, hey, all the girls like a guy with a guitar strap around their neck. So I taught myself 3 chords. I'd always been singing pop songs as a child. From the moment I first saw the Beatles in 1964 on the TV, I was hooked on pop music. It might have been 63 actually, and it was Jukebox Jury. I remember it to this day. And so I was always hooked on singing pop songs, and I was just mad about pop songs. So suddenly it was like I could get a guitar, and my auntie gave me a book on 3-chord wonders. They were all old kind of American folk songs, and I knew these songs from school actually, so I knew the tunes, and I just worked them out and started playing folk clubs and stuff like that. I just loved this performing. I played in bands, one thing and another. So from the age of 13, I was writing songs every week. I was writing songs. My English at school I was a disaster. They never knew I was writing all this intricate stuff at home. And so I think all that songwriting, and I lived for songwriting, literally. That was my apprenticeship. And when I look back, all those songs I wrote were story songs. A lot of them were story songs. It might have been all obfuscated and making it seem, but they were stories. So what happened when I left art college? Then eventually I realised, I really realised that children's books is where I ought to be. Lots of people have been saying it, but finally I heard the message. And I went to see a lady called Philippa Milne Smith, who eventually became head of Puffin Books, you know, sort of big lady. And she was just starting out, and she liked something that I'd done. So why don't you do this? And that was very much an illustration thing, but it was me. It was games, board games. So I did this book of board games. She liked that, and we did another one. But it was very much illustration. I devised all the games. I'm just thinking I should bring those books out again on. I should bring those books out again on Kindle or something like that. Anyway, so you build a relationship with an editor, and in those days it used to involve lunches and stuff like that, like long lunches that you don't really get anymore. And then one day she said to me, you know, you're a storyteller. And I said, okay. She said, I want you to write a story. And I was living way out in the country at the time. And she said, I'm putting together this little series called Town and Country. I've got somebody to write the town stories. You're really the only person I know who lives in the country and actually talks about it. Could you write a couple of country stories? I had a 6-hour train journey home. And as we were going through the countryside, I saw a field full of sheep and a farmer in the field with a Land Rover. You know, the Land Rover farmers' vehicles. Something said to me, Land Rover, Land Rover. And it just kind of just went ping in my head, and I thought, Land Rover Jim, the champion sheepdog. The little village I lived in had sheepdog trials every year, and it was all about sheep around there. We'd had this incident where the river dried up, the sheep came down into the village, there was chaos. I thought, I'll write a story about that. And I did, and I'm sure she edited it a lot. I can't remember quite how much input there was in there, but anyway, we knocked this story together. And then the other thing that was very much part of my life was every Wednesday into town to go to market. It was part of the sort of warp and weft of life, market day. And so I thought I should do a thing about that. And so I wrote a story about market day and Victoria, the Wednesday market bus, because the bus would come into the village, take people off. Me and my mum, we would drive into town. And but I was very aware of this bus going backwards and forwards to town. I don't think I ever went on it, actually. However, so I imagine this ancient old bus, and it would sort of go along and picking up trailers until it had this great long trailer, and all the people, all the market traders adding on their trailer, everybody going in. And so that was it. So I had these 2 books in the series, and that kind of really, I suppose, sort of started my career as an author. Although now I think about it, I had already had 6 little stories. That's another thing altogether. They had already been published. So from there, then people just accepted I was an author. And I suppose I did too, and I just spent all my time thinking about stories. So for me now, illustration and thinking stories and character development and character drawing development, it's all one thing to me. I'm constantly making notes in sketchbooks about stories, and when it actually comes to the point where I think I've got it now, I've got all the little pieces together, it's time to write the story, and I'll sit down and I'll write the story. I know exactly what the pictures are going to be, because I'm a very visual person. I have a kind of cinematic imagination, and I suppose I write quite cinematically as well, because I've been brought up with movies, I suppose, you know, and that's how it is. While I am writing, I'm imagining the pictures, and sometimes actually making little notes, something here, and then I know, actually I don't need to write that bit because that will be in the story. So it's a fluid thing. I'm an author illustrator, and that is what I do. I don't write a story and then illustrate it. I write and illustrate a story, and it's all one process. And I think there are other people like that. I think there are illustrators who just illustrate, and there are writers who just write. And I know my writer friends, if I've ever been in a situation where we've been in a kind of a workshop situation, they are very different creatures to me. And they will just kind of stare out of the window, look at their laptop, and for a start, I'm doing it with 2 fingers. I'm typing with 2 fingers, and I'm doing sort of a sentence at a time, and I'm thinking, how does how does that sentence work? And I'm thinking about the picture. And quite often I'm thinking, oh, the picture is going to be about there, so I really need to get about a paragraph's worth there. And so I'm editing the story as I'm going along with the amount of space I think I'm going to have on that page, almost. So I'm very aware of that. I suppose, again, when I left school, I went into printing. I did an awful lot of paste up and organising print and stuff like that. So that's a whole extra part of my experience. When I illustrate other people's stories, I'll get sent a story and I'll first of all go, don't think much of that. And that's, you know, professional jealousy or something, I don't know. And I'll say, don't be silly, this is a well-famous author. And I'll go back and look at it and go, oh yeah, that's quite good. Yeah, oh, I like that. Oh yes, and then I see what they've done. Oh yeah, and then I kind of start working out and I think, all right, oh look how they set that character up there, and that's happening over there. And then this character's doing that, and it's referring back to here. Oh, how? And then I could think that's been really well written, beautifully crafted. And I think, so right, what is going on here? I'm thinking like that. This character, I've got to make them do something here, so it's going to be funny over here when you've got the juxtaposition of where they were there, all that kind of thing. So it isn't just okay, we got some text on the page here, how is that going to, you know, how am I going to illustrate that piece of text? You're also illustrating that piece of text that is over there. You're setting it up over here for there. At the same time, it does have to illustrate that text. There's nothing worse for a child than to read a page of text where it says, the man waved and threw a blue ball, and there's an illustration of a guy with a yellow tennis racket, or a woman with a tennis racket, even worse. So it does have to relate to the text on the page. But you have to think about the whole book at the same time. I think that kind of says it all. But if you really, really want to know about this, and I'm going to do a bit of advertising now, come and join me on Patreon on my $7 illustrator level. I just give all this stuff away, and I explain how I think about stuff, and I'm really, really candid and explain the technicalities, I explain my thought processes, and you can learn an awful lot from there if you want to become a children's book illustrator, or possibly even an author too. So go and do that. I think I've said a huge amount in this video which can go in lots and lots of different directions. So if you have questions, I rely on you for questions to make videos like this. So do put your questions in the comments box below, and maybe I will answer yours like I have answered Jenneke's today. And I hope Jenneke, that kind of explains something. And if not, put another question down and we'll refine and kind of work out what it is that you really want to know. In the meantime, keep drawing, practice, and I'll see you next time. You take care now. Bye bye.